let's talk about therapeutics for a minute.
Yes.
So Paxlovid is really interesting. I was super skeptical when I first kind of read the studies, and now I have to acknowledge that skepticism was always good to have. But in the unvaccinated high-risk patients, the EPIC-HR study, which is the blockbuster study, you really see this absolutely remarkable effect. And now I'm getting texts from my friends in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who have no need for Paxlovid, and they want Paxlovid. And I think that we're becoming sort of Paxlovid over-reliant.
Well, that's how we're going to get resistance. And so we need to right now be working on next generation vaccines and next generation therapeutics, because we've been through this with other viruses. And if you have widespread use of it or inconsistent use, I mean, what really worries me is about the rebound.
Yeah.
Because that's going to, clearly 5 days may not be enough for a significant number of patients. That dose may not be enough to get complete suppression of the virus, and then you're having viral replication in the face of inadequate dosing, and that's how you get resistance. And so I worry every day that we really need to work on it. And I think the corollary to your 20 and 30 somethings wanting Paxlovid is the lack of ability to get it into the rural counties for the people who need it the most.
No, and we've already seen this in MMWR this week. I know there's data sets that it's like, who's going to get it? The same folks who got the monoclonals.
Exactly.
The wealthy, the young, the privileged. And that's not where we want to use this. And I also worried that it's sort of the like, oh, we have Paxlovid, great, we can let it rip.
Yeah. I call it pandemic response through polling. Every time we seem to get close to an election, everybody is like, oh, and now the theme is it's all good. Don't worry, it's all good. And everybody is don't worry, it's all good. It's all good if you live in New York City. It is not all good if you live in rural Mississippi.
That's right.
And our responsibility is to make it all good for everybody.
One place in the book that I was like waiting for the moment and it didn't come, and it's pretty comprehensive, but you did not really go into anything on convalescent plasma and the FDA's, in my view, incorrect decision to make that available. And I would wonder if you will talk about that a little bit, and I will just lay it out on my hand. I think that it's possible that overusing convalescent plasma, especially in the immune-compromised, can be a breeding ground for variants like Omicron. And it's likely that Omicron came out of someone who was overtreated.
No, I think Omicron comes out of huge populations that are experiencing reinfection, and there's partial immune pressure. And I think, there's a reason for that. We know that exists. We knew all of these things at the start, and that's what's upsetting to me. We know how viruses work. We know surges are predictable. We know when they're predictable in what parts of the country. We know exactly if a virus is here and goes there, it's coming to the United States. All of these things are predictable. I think the convalescent plasma piece is not so simple. And because it's not so simple, I think with the right, if we had titered, if this groups had titered, if they had selected the right patients, which were in the first 5 days, I think it should have.
No, now we see that.
Yes, it's just common sense. But I think, that's why I spend time on the book saying we need a different way to do clinical trials. It can't just be in the large research institutions. We needed more sites. We needed a CRO that can work across the United States. And if we had brought therapeutics in a clinical trial to these rural communities and had a community advisory board, people would have stayed up to date with the science and knowledge. That's what transformed HIV, is the dialogue between the community that was impacted and those of us who were doing clinical research. And that dialogue is critical to understand people's circumstances and how to best use therapeutics. So I feel like we have a roadmap to success, but we're still not using it. And it's solvable if we move from 30 to 50 premier institutions in the United States to 500 and really ensure that NIH is funding and putting 20% of all of their dollars into clinical trials in rural America. It would change this, because then rural America would have known the study for hydroxychloroquine. They would have known the study for plasma. They would have known the study for ivermectin. Now it's all, and I can tell you as of Christmas, there were still physicians prescribing ivermectin because they couldn't get Paxlovid. I mean, so all of these things are connected, and we can't treat them in isolation. We have to fix the core problem. And the core problem is healthcare delivery in both urban areas that are underserved and rural areas and tribal nations.
Yeah, and I think you spend a lot of time in the book talking about that work, and you were on the road at a time when it was dangerous to be on the road. So I think people don't know that about you.
It was. A lot of people, because it was not only dangerous for me, it was dangerous for my family. So I had to, every time I came back, I had to essentially quarantine and mask indoors because, I know I was constantly exposed.
Yeah. So there's good science, and there's good people, and there's people that you have trouble with, and your account of Scott Atlas's influence, it sort of rang true. It mapped out to what I would have imagined, and in a way, just in general, your experience is almost a realization of that sort of philosophical hypothetical. Like, what would you do? Would you stay and fight, or would you leave and protest? And if you are going to stay and fight, how are you going to fight? Not just for today, but for the longer haul. But you ran into a foe, certainly with the economic advisors, but really with Scott Atlas. Tell us about that, and tell us about what you did to stop him from doing what he wanted to do.
First, it was good to have him come out of the shadows, because I couldn't figure out where all this counterfactual information was coming from. And clearly it was coming into the White House from March on. I think they were responsible for the Easter thing. I think certainly that team, and you can see the impact he can have, that team went to Florida and convinced Governor DeSantis that they had achieved herd immunity. I got a call 2 days after that meeting from their health officials saying this is what they were told. Now, if you're a governor and you don't, are we expecting them to know all of these nuances of immunology and virology? You have a respected group coming in and telling you you've achieved herd immunity and no more people are going to get seriously ill. You want to be the first one that opens completely and does everything. So what happened in Florida could have happened in the United States, across every state.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the team that really helped me, the communications individuals, the intergovernmental affairs who helped me with all the meetings on the road, the communication team that blocked his access to the media, all of these people were working in concert to blunt his influence. And when I came back and found that he had rewritten the CDC guidance, and I couldn't stop it because I said in task force I can't support this, so it can't go out as a White House endorsed product. It could go out as a CDC endorsed product. I can't change what CDC is going to put up. But after, I saw the impact of that guidance nearly, overnight. And so I called Bob and I said, we're just going to rewrite it.
It's Bob Bradfield, head of CDC.
We're just going to rewrite it and we're going to post it. So you get your people to post it, we're going to rewrite it. Now, I got a very angry call from Mark Meadows, but Mark Meadows had every right to take it down and put the Scott Atlas version back up, and he didn't. So this is the problem when people say, well, why didn't you just leave? I knew behind the scenes what I was blocking. And what I was able to do in a positive way. So you don't leave in that. Plus, I come out of the military. That would be like me saying, I don't agree with my general, so I'm going to go on TV one time and let all of my teammates die. You don't do that. You work within and you make a change.
Now, hindsight's 2020. Where's a place where you decided now's not the time to push, but maybe you wish you had?
Early on, I had so many balls in the air. I just feel like I should have demanded a meeting with everybody from the FDA testing group and just saying, all right, we're not leaving this room until everybody agrees on the data and we come out of this with a plan. And, instead I wrote new guidance and, they would change it and I would edit it back. That was not efficient. I think I should have been more aggressive in convening outside of the task force because there were things that from CDC masking guidance to the whole therapeutic issue to the issues with the testing that, we got maybe 50 or 60% there, but we needed to be 90. And I think, I feel like I was pretty aggressive, but I think I could have been more aggressive.
So your successor, Ashish Jha, what advice would you give him if he had, or maybe not Ashish, because he's in a fairly, the atmosphere is not nearly as hostile for science, but a future administration that's similar to the Trump administration, what would you give your successor advice on, and on knowing on what to do to make the most impact without making it so, like you said, you get to do it once and then it's a news cycle and then it's over?
Yeah, then you can't do anything. I mean, let's be very clear. There was no one else in the White House, and if I had deserted my post, it would have opened it up completely to Scott Atlas being me. And I think that was the plan. I think that's why articles were leaked to the New York Times and other places in the spring, late spring and summer, saying that I was the one saying the pandemic was fine.
Right.
Clearly was not, but there was someone who was, and that was Scott. So I think there was a plan to undermine me to the point that I would leave, but I think you could see it from the January 6th committee. There were people all through the government, including some of the individuals appointed by President Trump, who understood that you had to stay and fight every day, that was your role, and that you had to do that. And I think my suggestion to anybody else in the White House is to find a team that you trust. And I think being able to give information to Tony and have Tony be the person that could get out on national news, working with Bob and Jerome and Steve to get out to the States, because they also went out to the States with me, really establishing that esprit de corps with a team that has your back, but that has really, most importantly, America's back. And I think that worked.
So when you bring up Tony Fauci, and it is interesting, it's been discussed a lot. He's sort of got this folk hero about him, feeling among the public health community and people who really support, doing everything we can about COVID. And at the same time, he also gets a little bit of special attention from the Rand Pauls of the world. How do you feel about that? You're not quite you don't walk around with the halo that Tony has, and yet also you don't, as far as I know, haven't been the recipient of nearly as much.
Oh God, yes, as much as if not more.
Okay, so yeah.
Documented death threats, hate mail, sexual innuendo text.
Okay.
I just don't. Maybe it's a difference when you work overseas and you work on HIV and you work in collaboration with the LGBT community in sub-Saharan Africa and many places where it's criminalized. You get a lot of death threats and you get a lot of messages underneath your door in the middle of the night. So I may not take it quite as seriously. I mean, there was one instance when the HHS security team called me and said Tony and I were both on the same list, and it was serious. But you can't let that. People were dying of COVID, so I just stayed focused on the mission.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I haven't read any books that Tony's written about this yet, but there's this sense that Tony somehow thread this needle where he could stay and fight and also speak out, and people.
No, he wasn't inside. He didn't have to fight. That would have been a waste of his time to have him doing what I was doing. I was doing what I was doing, and he was doing very well what he was doing.
And I think that's the disconnect. That I think people don't realize that you were the COVID or that you were the coronavirus task force coordinator. You were at the center of this, and I think maybe that's what people don't realize. As opposed to like an advisor.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a senior advisor in the White House. I made it very clear. I kept my PEPFAR hat, so I was dual-hatted the whole time. I was detailed into the White House. I never took a special advisor position like Scott or like Jared Kushner. And I think I have enough respect for Tony that I really saw his skill sets and strengths. And I made sure that he had everything he needed to be successful. That was my job as a coordinator. Everything Bob needed, everything Steve needed, everything FEMA needed, everything Operation Warp Speed needed to be successful, and then to work really in deep partnerships with the states and communities, because that was my other thing that I understood. And so I think everybody was working towards and for their strengths. And as coordinator, that's what you're supposed to do. You don't try to duplicate what someone else is doing. And I think, you know, when people have a minute to step back, when all of the emails are released, when people see the depth and breadth of my work in the White House, I think people will have a different vision. But someone had to go inside. I mean, you know, Tony and Bob and Steve from probably June on were just calling into task force. I mean, someone had to be at the table.
Yeah.
And someone had to be there every day when some of the more strange things would happen so that you could beat those back.
Yeah.